Chapter 41. Waylon nodded. Royal Crown has scouted us. Riley was stumped. You two are so lucky. But honestly, just by their looks alone, she would want them too if she was a scout. Colton happily went and sat next to her. Godmother, would you help them? I'm not in the business, how could I help? Riley felt a little awkward. But your cousin is. Riley's hand that was holding coffee jolted. She smiled. You know that? That wasn't hard, we definitely looked into our godmother. Colton jiggled his head happily. Riley laughed drily. Z really did make some geniuses. Godmother, please help us. If someone bullies you in the future, we will help you too. Colton tugged on her sleeve. That cute little face is too much to handle for Riley. Alright, of course, I'll help, ha ha ha. Willow slammed the agreement on Maisie's desk. She was going to put all the blame on the humiliation she got from Taylor on Maisie. I was wondering why you happily agreed. You were trying to humiliate me, right? You wanted to go, weren't you trying to prove yourself? I gave you a chance, but you didn't take full advantage of it, and you're blaming me? Maisie wasn't in a good mood after her talk with her father. Willow was so angry she trembled. I was wondering which stupid company you were trying to work with, Taylor Jewelry? You're just good at picking useless companies. Maisie raised her eyes and looked at her. Stupid company, useless? She laughed. Have you not heard about Taylor? Don't you know how much influence Taylor Jewelry has over the jewelry industry of Zlokova? How could you work here when you don't even know that? Maisie, I know you're jealous that I got Vena Jewelry. I can't help it that father gave it to me. Willow crossed her arms and scoffed. I'm not as good as you, but I'm luckier. I have the support of Dad and Nolan. What do you have? You're just a slightly famous international jewelry designer. That means nothing to me. Seeing Maisie's serious expression, Willow continued proudly. What's the point of you coming back? I'm just going to walk all over you. Take my advice, don't go against me. Or I'm going to make your life in Vena a living hell. Maisie's face turned colder upon hearing her threats. She had been under the impression that Vena that her mother had left behind was her only motivation, but the truth was, Vena was no longer related to her. The coldness Dad showed to Mom was all because of Layla and Willow. The woman who had ruined her family was threatening her with the love that her father had for her. Willow couldn't help showing off. Maisie hadn't learned her lesson before. She hadn't taken Layla and Willow's existence seriously because she thought that her father would trust her as the firstborn of the Vanderbilts. It was probably her overconfidence that had caused her downfall with the mother and daughter pair. That was too bad. She was utterly disappointed with her family. No one could threaten her other than her 3 children. Not even Stephen. Chapter 42. After Maisie stared at Willow for a long time, she calmly said, Willow, you're always so arrogant. She slowly got up and said, if you want Vena so much, it's yours now. Willow was shocked. This woman just said she was giving Vena to her? She finally got smart. I knew you couldn't win, you should have just given up sooner. Willow laughed. I'm not giving up. Maisie walked to her with her arms crossed. I'm just letting you have a little fun with Vena for now. I will still take it back in the future. Maisie didn't want the shares anymore. She wanted to acquire Vena. You? Willow scoffed. Yes, me. Maisie threw her resignation letter on her face and chuckled. Look forward to the day when you hand Vena back to me. She picked up her bag and looked at Willow. Willow. I think it's time you learn how it feels to be threatened. Didn't she love to use Nolan to threaten her? She was going to accept Nolan's proposal. She left the company without looking back. Willow stared at the letter in her hand. She didn't take what Maisie said to heart. As long as the woman left Vena, she couldn't care less about threats. Nolan would always believe and protect her. Why did this woman think she could win? She couldn't. At Black Gold Group, Maisie sat with her legs crossed in the waiting room of the hall with her shades on. After a short wait, a man walked toward her. That man was Nolan's personal assistant, Quincy Lawson. Quincy looked at her. "Ms. Vanderbilt, please follow me." Maisie stood up and walked toward the elevator with him. In the CEO's office, Nolan leaned back on his chair while reading some documents. He only raised his eyes when Quincy came in. Quincy left after he brought Maisie in. Nolan looked at her. "I knew you would come back to see me." Maisie took off her shades, walked to the desk, put her hand on it, and smiled. "It's all thanks to you. If you didn't tell me about the shares, why would I work with you?" "Work with me?" Nolan squinted. Maisie stood up straight and played with her sunshades. "Yes, work with you. I won't just take the $150 million. Nolan leaned back. "How do you want to do this?" Maisie looked down. "I can bring the jewelry company you give me to the peak of the jewelry world in a year. I'll only take 25% of the shares. You can take all the profit, but you cannot get involved with anything I do." After she said that, she looked up and caught Nolan's eyes. Nolan frowned and stared at her for a while. "Agreed." Upon seeing him agree, Maisie's shocked expression returned to normal in a split second. "Since you've agreed, I hope that you'll be able to stick to your promise." After a year, she would have enough to acquire Vena. He would have to live up to his promise. Maisie quickly signed the agreement and handed it to him. "Let's have a good partnership then." Quincy brought Maisie to the 16th floor. It was an empty floor, and the view was breathtaking. Her private office was spacious, much bigger than the one she had at Vena. Chapter 43. Quincy, who was standing behind her, said, "Ms. Vanderbilt, I'll arrange for renovation if you're happy with this." Maisie turned to look at him and said, "It's all right, I'll get someone to do it." After 10 days, the renovation of the 16th floor was pretty much complete. The display lobby was in black gold, and the lights on the walls were vintage and delicate glass lights. The VIP room had vintage decor, and the walls were covered with golden wall cabinets of uneven sizes. The chandelier was old European style, separated with a purplish-red curtain. Even the washrooms were decorated with corals. When Quincy and Nolan came to the 16th floor, they thought they were on the wrong floor after seeing the mysterious yet glamorous decor. A few workers walked past them carrying something, looking busy. Quincy looked at the black and gold-themed interior, a little hesitant. There's probably no need to make it look so dark. The light on top of him suddenly turned on, and Quincy was startled. He turned around and saw Maisie walking over. "Isn't it bright now?" Nolan turned to look at her. She was wearing a purplish-red puffed-sleeve maxi dress. It looked like something an aristocrat from the 19th century would wear. She had a silk bow tied around her collar. She wore a golden snake-shaped ring on her forefinger. And even her earrings were golden tassels. She had a black feathered hat with her beautiful makeup. She looked classy and cool. "You have a unique taste," Quincy said under his breath. Maisie shrugged. "You just don't understand art." Quincy was rendered speechless. Nolan walked closer to her. "Are you going with an extravagant style?" The extravagant style was vintage. It was an element that she had brought back in trend. The worst thing to happen in the jewelry world was to have the same element. Since Maisie had gotten out of that style, she wouldn't be able to use that as her main element anymore. Maisie looked at him, raised her brows, and smiled. "Haven't you heard of blended elements?" "What are blended elements?" Quincy asked. "It's combining the vintage look with new elements. That's the style that I'm going to work on. If you add new elements to carvings and tulle, you'll get some unique items out of them." After saying that, she walked to a pot, took one of the leaves, and brought it to them. These leaves are palm-shaped with jagged sides. The veins of the stem look clear. If we were to create something like this, to be meticulous, we could use cutout and tool to carve an exact replica. She dipped her finger in a cup of water on the table and dripped a droplet on the leaf. The water on the leaf looked like a pearl. We just need a little embellishment, and the leaves will present a different look. If this leaf is jewelry, the water droplet is the added ornament. Quincy looked like he understood, but maybe not. Maisie turned and looked at Nolan. Mr. Goldman, what do you think? Nolan's lips slightly curled. I look forward to your results. News about Black Gold Group having a new jewelry company spread like wildfire. Why do you think Mr. Goldman would suddenly want? Chapter 44. Why would you even ask? Don't you know that Mr. Goldman's girlfriend, Ms. Vanderbilt, is the director of Vena Jewelry? It's probably for her. I'm jealous. A few employees were having a discussion. They knew about the story of Mr. Goldman and Ms. Vanderbilt. But they didn't know that it was true. Why else would Black Gold Group establish a new jewelry company? Willow walked to the front desk with some dessert. The receptionists immediately stopped talking when they saw her, but it was too late. She had heard everything. Is Nolan in? Ms. Vanderbilt, he's in his office, the receptionist answered with a smile. Willow smiled and said, You were saying that Nolan started a new jewelry company? The lady was curious. Ms. Vanderbilt, didn't Mr. Goldman tell you about it? He didn't. Her smile was a little stiff. The girl replied, It could be, because he was planning to surprise you. Upon hearing that, her frozen smile faded and turned happy. Thanks. She proudly walked toward the elevator. Nolan had been thinking about her. Willow got to Nolan's office, pushed open the door, and walked in. She saw Quincy speaking to Nolan, so she smiled and walked to them. Nolan, you're here. Nolan's eyes darkened, his tone cold. Don't you knock? Willow chuckled in her heart. She had been too happy just now that she had forgotten the rules. I'm sorry, Nolan, This isn't Vena, please get the front desk to inform me when you're coming, that's the rule, Nolan coldly said. He gave some information to Quincy, and the latter left after taking them. Willow bit her lip. I know, I'll be more careful next time. Why are you here? Nolan looked at her with his cold eyes. He was being nice to her. If anyone had entered without his permission, he would have chased them out. Willow held up the cake she was holding. I've made some dessert, I know you're busy, so I bought some for you. Leave it on the desk, Nolan said with his eyes on the documents. Willow left the box on the table with a smile. She seemed to have remembered something and shyly said, Thank you, Nolan. Nolan furrowed his brows, looked up at her, and said, Thank me? Didn't you just start a new jewelry company? I know I don't know anything about jewelry, but you were still willing to help me, you didn't have to do that. Willow was ecstatic. She knew she wasn't as good as Maisie, but Nolan was still willing to help her. That showed how important she was to him. Nolan squinted and said coldly, The new jewelry company has nothing to do with you, just focus on Vena. Just that one statement and Willow's face changed. Nothing to do with her? She held tight to the corner of her dress while biting hard on her lips. Nolan flipped through the documents and coldly said, Please leave if there's nothing else. Willow left the office, looking solemn. The people at the front desk shouldn't have said that it was for her. Now she had been humiliated for thinking too highly of herself. She walked to the elevator. Two female employees who got off the elevator said excitedly, That designer is so pretty and kind. When I went to help her this morning, she bought me coffee. Yes. The ring that she designed is so beautiful too. I want it so badly. Chapter 45. What did Willow hear? She suddenly called out to them. Hold on. The two employees turned around. Can we help you? Willow walked up to them with a serious face and asked, Who is this jewelry designer that you were talking about? She suddenly had a bad feeling. Oh, she's the international jewelry designer, Zora. Willow's face fell. She held her fists. It was that woman. She suddenly remembered what Maisie had said when she left. No. This had been why that woman was willing to leave Vena. She had come to cling on to Nolan. That rascal. Willow rushed to the 16th floor with full-on rage and saw Quincy come out of the office. Quincy was stunned when he saw her and walked to her. Ms. Vanderbilt, why are you? Get out of the way. Willow pushed him aside and headed straight for Maisie's office. Quincy panicked. Should he inform Mr. Goldman? Maisie was at her desk drafting a design, but Willow suddenly rushed in and tore her design into shreds. You evil woman, didn't I ask you to stay away from Nolan? What is the meaning of this? Willow was hysterical. Maisie laughed, crossed her arms, and said, Mr. Goldman agreed to give me a jewelry company if I let go of the shares of Vena. Why, shouldn't you be happy now that I'm not trying to fight you for the shares? Didn't she like to use Nolan as leverage? She could finally know how it felt to be threatened. Willow taught her this. Willow was stunned. Nolan had given her a company just because she was willing to give up on Vena's shares? No way. How could she let a woman like this get close to Nolan? Maisie. I can give the shares of Vena to you. Didn't you want them? You can get out of Black Gold immediately. Haha. Maisie laughed. I don't want them now. You. Willow angrily pushed everything on the desk to the floor and pointed at her. You better know your place, Maisie. You know that Nolan is mine. How dare you seduce him? What are your intentions? I'm warning you, the entire Bassburg knows that I'm Nolan's girlfriend. Don't you even dare think of stepping in between us. Maisie scoffed. Willow, aren't you very confident with yourself? If you think that Nolan will always protect you, why are you talking to me about this? Are you worried that there's no future with Nolan, that he won't want you anymore? That's true. You always want things that you can't get. You always show off things that aren't yours. Maisie. You evil woman. Willow angrily raised her hand to slap her. Maisie saw through her and stopped her hand. She smiled. Willow, do you think that all women are desperate for men like you? All you know is to rely on men. You should use the time you use to complain like a crazy woman to gain some knowledge. You don't have a lot of time left at Vena. After saying that, Maisie threw her hand to the side. Willow's face turned pale after being mocked. You wait. She gnashed her teeth, gave Maisie a hysterical stare, turned, and left. She wasn't happy that Maisie bullied her, so she went to see Nolan. Quincy told Nolan about Willow meeting Maisie. Seeing that she was back, Quincy knew that she was here to complain without even having to guess. Chapter 46. Quincy couldn't put a finger on it, but he didn't have a good impression of Willow. He felt that this weak-looking woman who knew nothing wasn't good enough for Mr. Goldman. If the woman from 6 years ago hadn't been her, would Nolan have let her stay around for so long? Nolan, Z said that you gave her a new jewelry company. That's not true, is it? Nolan's eyes dimmed. She wasn't happy in Vena, so she left the shares to you. Why, are you not happy with that? Willow broke out in cold sweat. Maisie was telling the truth. Had Nolan really established a new jewelry company for her in exchange for giving up on the shares? Bullcrap. Willow would rather give up the shares of Vena. Nolan, I can give Vena's shares to Z, let her come back. Alright, Vena was a company her mother founded. How could she just leave it? Yes, that was right. If she could show that she was willing to give Vena's shares back to Maisie, Nolan would feel sorry because she was generous. However, Willow started panicking as she noticed that Nolan's eyes were turning cold. Why was he looking at her like that? Are you here to question my decision? Nolan sounded a little annoyed. It showed that there was a limit to his patience for Willow. Willow's face turned pale. That's not what I meant. If it's not, then go back and focus on Vena, Nolan coldly commanded. Willow bit her lip and turned around to leave. Her eyes were filled with hatred for Maisie. She hated how Maisie had suddenly come back. If not for her, Nolan wouldn't have been so cold to her. Nolan would give her whatever she asked for, but now, Nolan didn't even agree when she wanted Maisie to leave Black Gold. That horrible woman. She would lose everything one day. At Royal Crown, you two need to relax a bit later, or my efforts might be in vain. Riley carried Daisy in her arms, and Waylon walked next to her. She couldn't help but give them a reminder when they got to the company. Daisy's arms were around Riley's neck. She answered in her baby voice, "Don't worry, godmother, we know what to do." When they got to the floor of Helios' studio, the assistant, Nina, was startled. "Ms. Hills?" She was even more surprised to see her with two kids. "Is Helios in?" Riley asked. "Helios is in the office, can I help you?" Nina couldn't help but steal a few more looks at the children. They were so beautiful. "Oh, these two are my niece and nephew, child stars that Royal Crown just signed. I want to let them meet Helios." So they're the new child stars that Royal Crown just signed with. Nina had definitely heard about them. She walked to Waylon, leaned down, and patted his head. "Hello." Waylon was probably shy or something. He kept his head low and said, "Hello." Nina was a sucker for cute kids. "So adorable, I didn't know that you were related." "Wow, these two are newly signed child stars, they're so beautiful." "Yes. They look even better in person." A few female employees came over and started pinching and patting their heads. They couldn't keep their hands off them. Riley couldn't help but laugh. Z's children were just too lovable. Chapter 47. Helios stepped out of his office. "What's happening?" He was surprised when his gaze fell on the children. Riley let Daisy down, got up, and walked toward Helios. "These two are my niece and nephew, Royal Crown just signed them, so I brought them here to see you." Waylon walked forward, holding Daisy's hand. They bowed and said, "Hello, Uncle Helios." Helios looked at them for a long time, squinting. These children's faces. He half squatted to be at their eye level and patted Daisy's head. "What are your names?" "I'm Daisy." "This is my brother, Waylon," Daisy answered, beaming. Helios looked at Riley. "Since when did you get a niece and a nephew?" Riley smiled while she scratched her face. "They're my best friend's kids, they call me godmother, so they're pretty much my niece and nephew." Helios stood up straight. "Your best friend's children?" "Yes." Riley laughed. "Come in." Riley walked to the kids and held their hands to walk into the office. Helios crossed his legs and sat on the couch. He chuckled while looking at the children next to Riley. "Who's their father?" Waylon looked at him. "We don't have a daddy." Helios was stunned, and his beautiful eyes squinted. Riley sighed. "Helios, their mother is a single mom, it was tough for her to bring them up by herself, that's why they signed with Royal Crown. They wanted to help their mother make some money." Daisy and Waylon looked at Riley at the same time. They didn't know that their godmother was a drama queen too. Helios picked up the coffee cup and took a sip. His lips curled. "Navigating the entertainment business isn't easy at all, especially when they're so young. Did you bring them to see me because you want me to take care of them?" Daisy and Waylon looked at each other. The actor was even more clever than Riley. This was going to be fun. Riley laughed dryly, lowered her head, and said, "You knew." Helios put down the cup. "Did the kids put you up to this?" Riley was surprised, but Helios calmly continued. "I grew up with you, so I know you too well. You wouldn't usually come to me for help unless someone asked you to. Did their mother ask for this?" Waylon's expression changed when he heard that. "It was our idea, our mom doesn't know about this, she didn't want us getting into the industry, we wanted to come." godmother. You don't need to lie for us anymore. Daisy tugged on her arm and pouted. We just asked you to bring us here because we know you're Mr. Boucher's cousin. She stood up after saying that, Uncle Helios, we're not insisting that you take care of us. If you're unwilling, we won't impose. Waylon, let's go. Waylon looked at Helios and got up. All right, let's go. Hey, Daisy-Riley got anxious when she saw them leaving. Helios lowered his gaze and smiled. Come back. Riley looked at Helios in disbelief. Did he agree to it? Daisy and Waylon turned around, walked back, and took their seats. Chapter 48. Helios moved his eyes onto Waylon's face. He couldn't help but say, you remind me of someone who would suddenly pretend to be strangers. It was exactly how Nolan was like. Riley was astonished. Helios, you don't blame us anymore? The two children are pretty cute. Since Royal Crown has signed them, and I have a magazine shoot coming up, I'm going to bring them along for that. At the manager's office, what? You're bringing the two kids on the magazine cover? Helios' manager, Morgan Lynch, stared at the two children who were with Helios, looking bewildered. Helios nodded. Yes, they seem to be very photogenic. Wouldn't they make the pictures look even better? But Morgan rubbed her temple. How do we explain this to the publishers? Let me handle it. I'll give them a good explanation. Morgan was rendered speechless. Helios was a big star in the industry, even bigger than the A-listers, and Royal Crown had signed these children. As the senior at the top of the food chain, Royal Crown probably wouldn't oppose it if Helios wanted to take care of the newcomers. The fans would be the bigger problem. Helios had worked with a newbie before that, but his fans were not happy with that person. Now that he would be working with kids, she was just worried about the negative impact it might bring to them. That being said, when the photos came out and were posted on the magazine's official Twitter account, their hit rate increased exponentially and shot to trending in a heartbeat. There were 400 million retweets and 80,000 mentions. At Angels on Earth, I can see how Hell's would be if he had kids. At fans everywhere, this is the end of me. I declare myself the first fan of this father-children relationship. At Forever Midlegals, who are these cuties? Wrap them up for takeaway, please. At Love Us Light Helios, Hells, don't keep the babies to yourself. Share them. At Helios Shasna fans, please move aside. I want to be the top comment. #sobs. Helios fans had always been picky and protective. If the people working with him weren't A-listers, they would be jeered for trying to get attention by working with Helios. But these two child stars were accepted. At Black Gold Group, when Quincy saw what was trending, he exclaimed, the children are trending, along with Helios. Nolan raised his head. Let me see. Quincy passed the tablet to him, and he tapped on the trending post, frowning. What are they doing with Helios? I heard that it was because Helios agreed to be on the cover shoot with them, Quincy answered. Nolan was silent. Helios rarely worked with newcomers, so why would he work with these two? He had always been a busy man. So how did the kids get a hold of him? Call and ask who introduced the children to Helios. Quincy nodded, walked aside, and called Royal Crown. They soon gave him the answer, and he slowly turned around. It was Ms. Hills. Nolan's expression changed, and his eyes darkened. Ms. Hills, the one who was with Maisie, does she know the children? Chapter 49. Now that I think of it, doesn't Ms. Hills know Ms. Vanderbilt? When you got me to send Ms. Vanderbilt home, she seemed to be staying at the beach villas. Would she happen to know the children? Quincy was pondering when Nolan got up and walked out. Quincy was surprised, but followed along quickly. Mr. Goldman, where are you going? On the 16th floor, Uncle Kennedy, you can start here tomorrow. I've notified all the employees that Vena has fired. Maisie was making a call in front of the window and smiled when Kennedy said something in reply. All right, don't worry, I've made arrangements. After the call ended, Maisie held the phone in her hand. When they got there tomorrow. It would be the time to start coming up with a name for the jewelry brand. She turned around and was startled by Nolan, who had suddenly appeared behind her. "Mr. Goldman, you." Nolan walked up before Maisie could finish, cornered her against the window, and looked at her face calmly. "Do you have children?" Maisie was a little stunned and suspicious. "What does having kids or not have anything to do with you?" She tried to walk away. Nolan moved to block her. "So do you?" Maisie's face darkened. Why was Nolan suddenly asking her about this? Had he found something? "I'm not even married, so why would I have kids, Mr. Goldman? If there's nothing else, I need to ask you to leave." "Who are Waylon and Daisy Vanderbilt to you?" Nolan stared straight at her. He was waiting to catch a hint or something from her expression. Maisie shuddered, eyes looking down. How did he know about Waylon and Daisy? Nolan pressed his palm on the window behind her, leaned in, and said, "Answer me." Maisie calmly looked him in the eye, but was actually breaking out in a cold sweat. "Unrelated." "Don't let me go, ask your friend Riley." "You." Maisie almost burst out laughing. She gnashed her teeth and smiled. "Go then, I was curious why you came to me instead. What makes you think I have children?" Maisie looked calm. She couldn't be frazzled or anxious. "He must not suspect anything." Nolan took a long look at her, still doubtful. Riley knew those two kids, and the kids were both Vanderbilts. The woman who had spent a night with him 6 years ago was Willow. If Willow had been pregnant, the children would be their age. But what he was most concerned about was that Maisie had been kicked out of the family back then. He had never suspected Willow until the two children showed up. Now, he had to start questioning the events from 6 years ago, because even his father believed that the children were his. Maybe he should reinvestigate what had happened that night. Maisie raised an eyebrow and scoffed. "You are acting weird. If you want kids, just ask Willow for them." Nolan pressed his lips together tightly. "You think they're related to me just because they're also Vanderbilts? Why don't you suspect that they're related to Willow instead?" Maisie flashed a hollow smile. "I know it wasn't Willow." "That's too bad then. I don't have children. Stop testing me. I hope for your sake that they're unrelated to you and that you aren't the woman from 6 years ago. Or else," Nolan lifted her chin, "you won't be able to handle the consequences." After Nolan left, Maisie balled up her fists, her forehead breaking out in a sweat. Chapter 50. Maisie always thought it had just been a coincidence. So the man from 6 years ago really was him. Maisie was starting to lose her cool. That was why when Layla had seen Colton and Daisy, she had asked if they were hers. That was also why Willow kept her at arm's length. Afraid that she would get close to Nolan. She was not going to let them take her kids. No way. Willow pushed everything on the table to the floor. Layla walked in on her throwing a fit, so she asked, "Willie, what's wrong?" "Mom. We need to do something before that woman steals Nolan away." Layla was not going to let that happen. She walked up to her, nervous. "What actually happened?" Willow told her mother everything about Nolan giving Maisie a jewelry company. After she heard that, her expression changed. "Maisie, that vile woman, she has so many tricks up her sleeves." Ever since her return, the mother and daughter had never had a day of peace. Now that she had finally left Vena, she went to Nolan's jewelry company instead. Layla remembered something and asked, "Was the incident with Mr. Baldwin exposed?" "Enough." Willow gnashed her teeth. "That woman ran away. She wouldn't have fallen into the hands of Sergio if not because that woman had run away. Crap, it was all because of Maisie. She had been supposed to be the one spending the night with Sergio." Layla was sweating. "That woman is getting harder and harder to deal with. This isn't going to work." Willow took her mother's hand. "Mom, I don't want to wait any longer. Not only is Nolan unhappy with me, but he's also starting to suspect what actually happened 6 years ago. I'm afraid that. That reminds me, why would Nolan suspect anything? You covered your tracks pretty well." "Who knows? Willow snapped her hand away angrily and sat down on the bed irritably. Layla remembered something and said, "Willie, I'm concerned about one thing." "What is it?" "When we were at the restaurant, I saw Mr. Goldman and the children together. They both looked exactly like him, even I suspected they were his children." "What?" Willow's expression changed while she shot up on her feet. "Why are you just telling me this?" "I was just suspecting, and after that, I went to see that woman, but she denied having kids." Layla muttered something and put her hand on Willow's shoulder to comfort her. "That woman just spent one night with Nolan. It's not that easy to get children, but we don't know who the mother of those children are, so you need to be careful." Willow froze. She had spent 6 years with Nolan, but he had never touched her. Why would he touch some other woman? No way. She would not let anyone stand in her way, not Maisie, not the children, no one. "Oh, Willie, I need to visit the hospital in a few days." "Why?" "Why else? Maisie came back and had a fallout with your father because of Vena's shares." Willow hummed. "Isn't that a good thing?" "Not at all. Your father is trying to make a new will, because of that. It's obvious that she still holds a place in his heart." Layla held on to Willow's shoulders. "If I could give him a male heir, everything the Vanderbilts have would be ours. When that happens, I'll have a better place in the family, and if you get Nolan to confirm your relationship, we'll be able to take her down easily."